The house stood empty, hollow like my heart at that moment. 57 years of memories, gone in a single night. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Dallas, Texas. Well, I used to live somewhere else until 3 days ago, when my world collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. You see, sometimes the people we love most are the ones capable of hurting us deepest. Sometimes the children we sacrifice everything for become the very daggers that pierce our hearts. And sometimes, just sometimes, we discover that we're stronger than we ever imagined possible. But let me start from the beginning, from the moment I made the most devastating mistake of my life, though I didn't know it then. My son, Ethan Thompson, 39 years old, had always been my pride and joy. After his father passed away 12 years ago, it became just the two of us against the world. I raised him to be independent, strong, and honest, or so I thought. 3 months ago, Ethan came to me with tears in his eyes and desperation in his voice. His construction business was failing, creditors were knocking at his door, and bankruptcy loomed like a dark cloud over his future. "Mom, I'm going to lose everything," he sobbed in my living room that Tuesday afternoon. "The business Dad helped me build, my reputation, everything. I owe $340,000, and I have nowhere to turn." My heart broke, seeing my grown son so vulnerable, so defeated. Without hesitation, I made the decision that would change everything. I sold my house, the same house where I'd raised him, where his father and I had built our life together, worth $380,000, to save him from financial ruin. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I told him, stroking his graying hair like when he was a child. "We're family. Family takes care of each other." The relief in his eyes was overwhelming. He hugged me so tightly, I could barely breathe, and through his tears, he whispered promises that now echo in my mind like cruel jokes. "Mom, I promise I'll take care of you forever. You'll never want for anything. We'll find a beautiful apartment together, and I'll make sure you're comfortable for the rest of your life." I believed him. God help me. I believed every single word. We planned to move in together temporarily while we looked for a nice apartment. Ethan suggested I gather my things the night after the house sale closed, giving him time to prepare everything perfectly for my arrival at his place. I was touched by his thoughtfulness, imagining he wanted to surprise me with a beautifully arranged space. That night, October 15th, 2024, I drove to my former home one last time to collect my personal belongings. The new owners had graciously allowed me to retrieve my furniture and memories. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. The house was dark, completely dark, with an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I walked to the front door with my key, but as I stepped inside, my blood froze. The house was empty. Not just empty, stripped bare. Every piece of furniture, every family photo, every single item that had made this house our home was gone. Even the light fixtures had been removed, leaving only naked wires hanging like broken promises from the ceiling. My hands trembled as I called Ethan's phone. Straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. Nothing. In my panic, I rushed outside and found Mrs. Martinez, my neighbor of 23 years, watering her garden despite the late hour. "Linda, I was wondering when you'd come by," she said, her expression shifting from friendly to concerned as she noticed my distress. "Mrs. Martinez, have you seen Ethan? The house is completely empty." Her face turned pale. She set down her watering can and approached me slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Oh, honey," she whispered, her voice heavy with sympathy. "They left last night. I saw them loading up 2 large moving trucks around midnight." The world began spinning around me. "They?" I managed to croak. "They who?" "Your son and a woman. A blonde woman, maybe in her 30s. I thought you knew they were moving out early." I felt my knees buckle. "Mrs. Martinez caught my arm, steadying me as the full weight of betrayal crashed over me like a tsunami. If you're watching this story unfold and feeling your heart race like mine was that night, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. Standing in that empty house, surrounded by nothing but echoes and broken dreams, I felt something die inside me. Not just my trust in Ethan, but a part of my very soul. The silence was deafening, interrupted only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and Mrs. Martinez's gentle words of comfort. "Linda, come sit on my porch. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way, I had. I'd seen the ghost of the son I thought I knew, the ghost of the relationship I thought we shared, the ghost of the promises that had evaporated like morning mist. As we sat on her familiar wicker chairs, Mrs. Martinez brought me a cup of tea with shaking hands. Her own shock was evident. She'd watched Ethan grow up, had seen him mow my lawn every weekend, had witnessed what she thought was a loving son caring for his aging mother. "Tell me exactly what you saw," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She sighed deeply, her weathered hands wrapping around her own cup. Around 11:30 last night, I heard trucks, big ones. When I looked out my window, I saw Ethan directing 2 men loading furniture. "Everything, Linda. Your beautiful dining set, the piano, even those family portraits from the hallway." Each word felt like a physical blow. And the woman. She was giving orders too, pointing at things, very commanding. She had this expensive-looking car, a white BMW. They seemed to know each other well, very comfortable together. Mrs. Martinez paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. "Linda, they were affectionate, holding hands, kissing. It looked like they'd been together for a while." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. Not only had my son stolen my life savings and abandoned me, but he'd done it all while having a secret relationship. How long had this been planned? How long had they been laughing at the naive old woman who was funding their new life together? "Did you hear them say anything about where they were going?" I cracked my window open, but I only caught fragments. Something about new start, beautiful place, and finally free. "Oh, Linda, I'm so sorry. If I'd known you didn't know, I would have called you immediately." I spent that first night on Mrs. Martinez's couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every conversation, every moment, every sign I must have missed. How could I have been so blind? How could the child I'd nursed through fevers, taught to ride a bike, supported through his father's death, and saved from financial ruin, how could he just disappear with my entire life? The next morning brought no relief, only a clearer view of my devastation. I had $4,000 in my checking account, money I'd kept for immediate expenses during the transition. Everything else, every penny from the house sale, had gone to pay Ethan's debts. I was essentially homeless, nearly penniless, and completely alone. But then, around 10 a.m., as I sat in Mrs. Martinez's kitchen trying to figure out my next move, I remembered something important that Ethan and his accomplice couldn't have known about, something that would change everything. 3 years ago, after my husband's death, I'd been struggling with grief and depression. During one of my darkest moments, I'd made a decision that seemed extreme at the time, but now felt like divine intervention. I'd hired a private investigator to conduct a thorough background check on anyone who might try to take advantage of me in my vulnerable state. The investigator, Marcus Reed, had become something of a friend over the years. He'd helped me with various small matters, verifying contractors, checking references for caregivers I was considering. More importantly, he'd given me his card with a promise. "Mrs. Thompson, if anyone ever tries to hurt you or take advantage of you, call me immediately. Don't wait, don't hesitate, just call." With trembling fingers, I dialed his number. "Marcus Reed Investigations. Marcus, this is Linda Thompson. I need your help. I need it desperately." His voice immediately shifted to concern. "Mrs. Thompson, what's happened?" I told him everything. The house sale, the empty promises, the midnight disappearance, the mysterious woman. As I spoke, I could hear him taking notes, his breathing becoming more agitated. "Mrs. Thompson, this sounds like a well-orchestrated con. The timing, the emotional manipulation, the secret accomplice. This has all the hallmarks of fraud. We need to act fast." "But he's my son, Marcus. How can I—" "Ma'am, with all due respect, he stopped being your son the moment he decided to steal your life savings and abandon you. What he's done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's criminal, and I'm going to help you make sure he faces the consequences." For the first time since discovering the empty house, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was determination, a steel resolve that I didn't know I possessed. What do we do first? First, we file a police report. Then, we start tracking them down. Mrs. Thompson, I promise you this. Your son may think he's gotten away with the perfect crime, but he's about to learn that he picked the wrong mother to mess with. Marcus Reed arrived at Mrs. Martinez's house within an hour, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man ready for war. In his late 50s, with silver hair and sharp gray eyes, he had the look of someone who'd seen every kind of human betrayal imaginable. But even he seemed shaken by the details of my story. Mrs. Thompson, in 32 years of investigative work, I've seen children steal from parents, but this level of premeditation and cruelty is exceptional, he said, setting up his laptop on Mrs. Martinez's dining table. The good news is that their very thoroughness might be their downfall. He explained that people committing fraud often leave digital trails, especially when they're moving large amounts of money and relocating quickly. Credit card transactions, phone records, social media activity, real estate transactions, everything leaves a mark in our connected world. Tell me about this woman Mrs. Martinez described. Had you ever seen her before? Ever heard Ethan mention anyone special in his life? I racked my brain, thinking back over the past months. No, never. And that's strange because Ethan usually told me about his relationships. After his divorce 3 years ago, he'd been dating occasionally, but he always introduced the women to me. He said my approval mattered to him. Marcus's expression darkened. That suggests this relationship was deliberately hidden from you, which means it was likely part of the plan from the beginning. He pulled up Ethan's social media profiles on his laptop. What we found made my stomach churn. For the past 6 months, there had been subtle signs I'd completely missed. Photos at restaurants with the camera angle carefully cropped to hide his companion. Check-ins at locations I didn't recognize. Comments from friends asking about his mystery lady. Look here, Marcus pointed to a Facebook post from 2 weeks ago. He's at some resort in Colorado, claiming it's a business trip. But look at the reflection in his sunglasses. You can see a woman's hand. The methodical deception was breathtaking. While I'd been worrying about his financial troubles, bringing him homemade meals, and offering emotional support, he'd been planning my downfall with surgical precision. Marcus began making phone calls, his network of contacts impressive. Within 2 hours, he'd gathered alarming information. Ethan's business debts were real, but they weren't as insurmountable as he'd claimed. The $340,000 he'd said he owed was actually closer to $180,000, and he'd already negotiated payment plans with most creditors. Mrs. Thompson, your son didn't need the full amount from your house sale to save his business. He needed it to fund a new life with this woman. The police report was filed that afternoon. Detective Sarah Chen, a fraud specialist with the Dallas Police Department, listened to my story with growing anger. Ma'am, this isn't just theft. It's elder abuse, fraud, and potentially money laundering. The fact that he used emotional manipulation and family obligations makes it even more serious. We're going to pursue this aggressively. But Detective Chen also delivered sobering news. The challenge is that technically, you gave him the money voluntarily. Proving fraud requires demonstrating that he deliberately deceived you about his intentions. That's where Mr. Reed's investigation becomes crucial. Over the next 3 days, Marcus worked tirelessly. He tracked Ethan's credit card usage to a luxury apartment complex in Scottsdale, Arizona. The lease was signed by one Jessica Walsh, 34 years old, with an interesting background. She'd been involved in 2 previous relationships where older men had mysteriously gifted her large sums of money before the relationships ended abruptly. Mrs. Thompson, I believe your son didn't just betray you. He was betrayed himself. This Jessica Walsh appears to be a professional con artist who specializes in manipulating men into defrauding their families. Ethan may have started as her accomplice, but I suspect he's become another one of her victims. The irony was bitter. My son had betrayed me to impress a woman who was almost certainly betraying him in return. Marcus showed me evidence of Jessica's pattern. 3 years ago, she'd convinced a businessman in Phoenix to mortgage his family home to fund their joint venture. 2 years before that, a widower in Tucson had liquidated his retirement accounts for her investment opportunity. In each case, the men had ended up broke and alone, while Jessica disappeared with the money. How do we prove this? I asked. We follow the money, and we set a trap. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to do something that might be difficult, but it's our best chance of getting justice. He handed me a burner phone. I want you to call Ethan. Tell him you're hurt, but you forgive him. Say you've received a small inheritance from a distant relative, maybe $50,000, and you want to give it to him as a gesture of good faith. The plan was audacious. If Ethan took the bait and agreed to meet for the money, it would prove his ongoing intent to defraud me. If he refused, or seemed genuinely remorseful, we'd know Jessica was fully in control. But Marcus, what if he really is sorry? What if he wants to make things right? Marcus's expression softened. Mrs. Thompson, I hope for your sake that he is, but if he's truly sorry, he'll come clean about everything without the promise of more money. A genuinely repentant son would be focused on returning what he stole, not collecting additional funds. That evening, with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone, I made the call that would determine my son's fate, and mine. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then I heard his voice, and my heart nearly stopped. Mom? Mom? Oh my God, Mom, is that really you? I've been trying to reach you for days. The sound of Ethan's voice hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, all my anger and hurt melted away, replaced by the instinctive love of a mother hearing her child's distress. He sounded genuinely panicked, genuinely sorry, and for one heartbreaking second, I almost abandoned Marcus's plan entirely. Ethan, I managed to whisper, fighting to keep my voice steady. Where are you? Where are my things? Mom, please let me explain. Something terrible happened. I was trying to surprise you, to set up a beautiful apartment for us, and then... God, Mom, I was robbed. They took everything. I've been going crazy trying to figure out how to tell you. Marcus was listening on an extension, taking notes. He held up a sign that read, Keep him talking. Robbed? Ethan, what do you mean robbed? I hired movers to take your furniture to a storage facility while I prepared our new place. But they weren't legitimate movers, Mom. They were criminals. They took everything and disappeared. I've been working with the police, but... His voice broke convincingly. Mom, I lost everything. All your beautiful things, all our family memories. I'm so ashamed I couldn't face calling you. The lie was so elaborate, so detailed, that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. But Mrs. Martinez had seen him directing the movers, had seen him with Jessica, had watched him orchestrate the whole operation personally. Where are you now, sweetheart? I asked, the endearment tasting like poison in my mouth. I'm in Phoenix, staying with a friend while I try to sort this mess out. Mom, I swear on Dad's grave, I'm going to make this right. I'm going to find those criminals and get your things back. Marcus handed me a note. Ask about the woman. Ethan, Mrs. Martinez said she saw you with a woman that night. Who was she? There was a pause, a long, telling pause. A woman? Mom, I don't know what Mrs. Martinez thought she saw, but I was working with the moving crew. Maybe she saw one of the female movers. It was dark, and you know how Mrs. Martinez's eyesight has been getting worse. The casual dismissal of my neighbor's account, the smooth way he deflected the question, chilled me to the bone. This wasn't the confused, desperate son I'd thought I was talking to. This was a calculating liar. Ethan, I need to see you. I need to understand what happened. Mom, I want to see you too, more than anything, but I'm so ashamed. How can I face you when I've failed you so completely? When I've lost everything you trusted me with? Marcus held up another note. Offer the money. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment of truth. Ethan, listen to me. I received some unexpected news yesterday. My cousin Margaret in Houston passed away, and she left me a small inheritance. It's only $50,000, but I want you to have it. I want to help you get back on your feet so you can fix this situation. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, could imagine him calculating, weighing his options. Mom, I couldn't take your inheritance money. That wouldn't be right. Please, Ethan, let me help. Let me do this one thing to show you that I still believe in you, that I still love you despite everything that's happened. Another pause. Then, Mom, if you're sure, if you really think it would help, maybe I could use part of it to hire a private investigator to track down those thieves, but only if you're absolutely certain. And there it was. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd loved unconditionally, had just agreed to steal from me again. He hadn't asked about my living situation, hadn't offered to return any portion of the money he'd already taken, hadn't even suggested meeting me to provide comfort after such a traumatic experience. He'd simply calculated how to extract more money from his grieving homeless mother. Where should we meet? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Well, I'm stuck in Phoenix for now, dealing with the police investigation. Could you wire the money? I know it's not ideal, but I promise once I get this sorted out, I'll come straight home to Dallas and we'll figure out our living situation together. Marcus was nodding approvingly, making rapid notes. We had him. Ethan was actively continuing the fraud, even after I'd discovered the theft. In legal terms, this made everything much more serious. I'll need a day or two to access the inheritance funds, I told him. They're tied up in probate paperwork. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. And Mom, I love you so much. You're the best mother a son could ask for. I'm going to make you proud again, I promise. After I hung up, I sat in Mrs. Martinez's kitchen, shaking. Marcus poured me a cup of coffee and sat across from me, his expression grim. Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry you had to hear that, but you've just provided us with evidence of ongoing fraud. He's not a victim of circumstances. He's an active participant in stealing from you. Detective Chen arrived an hour later to listen to the recorded conversation. Her reaction was immediate and decisive. We have enough for arrest warrants. Wire fraud, elder abuse, theft by deception. Mrs. Thompson, your son is looking at serious prison time. But even as the wheels of justice began turning, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. I felt only the profound grief of a mother who had just learned that the child she'd given everything to had chosen greed over love, selfishness over family. Marcus placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Thompson, there's something else you need to know. We've been monitoring Ethan's financial activity. The money from your house sale, he's already spent over $200,000 of it. Luxury cars, expensive jewelry, a high-end apartment lease, gambling debts. Even if we recover some assets, you may never get everything back. The hits just kept coming. Not only had my son betrayed me, but he'd been living lavishly on my sacrifice while leaving me homeless and destitute. What happens now? I asked. Detective Chen closed her notebook. Now we coordinate with Phoenix Police to arrest them both. Mrs. Thompson, I want you to know that justice will be served. Your son may have forgotten what family means, but the law hasn't forgotten what theft means. Phoenix Police arrested Ethan and Jessica at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see it, but Detective Chen called me with the details. They'd been found in a luxury apartment complex, sleeping in a king-sized bed that cost more than some people's cars, surrounded by shopping bags from high-end stores. The life they'd built on my sacrifice was impressive in its shameless extravagance. Marcus drove me to Phoenix the next day. I needed to see this through, needed to look my son in the eye and try to understand how we'd arrived at this moment. The drive through the Arizona desert gave me time to think, to grieve, and to prepare myself for what might be the last conversation I'd ever have with Ethan as his mother. The Maricopa County Jail was a grim, imposing building that seemed to swallow hope whole. As we sat in the visitors' waiting area, Marcus explained what the investigators had discovered about Jessica Walsh. Mrs. Thompson, your instincts about her were right. She's been running this con for at least 5 years. We found evidence of 4 previous victims, all men with access to family money or inheritance. The pattern is always the same. She identifies a target, usually someone with financial stress or emotional vulnerability, seduces them, then convinces them to defraud their families. But how did she find Ethan? Online dating app, specifically one marketed to successful professionals seeking discreet relationships. Ethan's profile mentioned his construction business and his close relationship with his financially comfortable mother. To Jessica, he was the perfect mark. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but each revelation felt like another betrayal. Ethan hadn't just stumbled into this situation. He'd advertised himself as someone with access to my money. When they brought Ethan into the visitor's room, I barely recognized him. Gone was the confident, guilty charm from our phone conversation. He looked haggard, defeated, his eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. When he saw me through the glass partition, he completely broke down. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass, my hand trembling. Tell me why, Ethan. Help me understand how my son became someone I don't recognize. Through his tears, the truth finally came out. Jessica had approached him on the dating app 6 months ago. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in his business struggles. She'd listened to his fears about bankruptcy with such empathy, such understanding. She made me feel like a man again, Mom. After the divorce, after Dad died, after the business started failing, I felt like such a disappointment. But Jessica believed in me. She said she'd been through something similar with her ex-husband's debts. So you told her about me? About the house? His face crumpled. She was so worried about me. She kept saying she wished she could help, but she'd already lost everything helping her ex. Then one day, she mentioned how lucky I was to have a mother who owned property. She said it casually, like she wasn't really suggesting anything, but you started thinking about it. I swear, Mom, at first I just wanted to borrow against the house value. I was going to take out a second mortgage and pay you back with the business profits. But Jessica said that would take too long, that the creditors wouldn't wait. She said if you really loved me, you'd want to help completely. The manipulation had been masterful. Jessica had never directly suggested that Ethan defraud me. Instead, she'd planted seeds of doubt about my love, had made him feel weak for not being able to solve his problems alone, had positioned my sacrifice as the ultimate proof of our relationship. And the moving trucks? The midnight escape? That was Jessica's idea. She said if we moved your stuff gradually, it would be too painful for you, like watching someone die slowly. She said it would be kinder to do it all at once, like ripping off a bandage. She promised we'd call you the next morning and explain everything. But you didn't call me the next morning, Ethan. You disappeared. Because when I woke up that morning and saw how happy Jessica was, how she was already talking about our new life, I realized what I'd done. I destroyed my relationship with my mother for a woman I'd known for 6 months, and I panicked. So you decided to lie instead of telling the truth? Jessica said if I admitted what we'd done, you'd have me arrested. She said the only way to fix things was to pretend we'd been robbed, to make you feel sorry for me instead of angry. She said once things calmed down, we could gradually recover some of your belongings. I stared at my son through the glass, seeing clearly for the first time in months. Ethan, do you hear yourself? Even now, you're blaming Jessica for your choices. You chose to tell her about my house. You chose to ask me for the money. You chose to lie about how much you owed. You chose to move my belongings in the middle of the night. You chose to disappear without a word. And you chose to lie to me on the phone instead of telling the truth. But Mom, I love you. I never wanted to hurt you. If you loved me, you would have introduced me to Jessica months ago. If you loved me, you would have been honest about your debts from the beginning. If you loved me, you would have moved my belongings openly, in daylight, with my knowledge. If you loved me, you would have called me immediately to explain, not disappeared for days while I sat homeless and heartbroken. The truth was finally sinking in for both of us. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a series of calculated decisions, each one choosing Jessica and money over me. I want you to hear this, Ethan, because it might be the last thing I ever say to you as your mother. I sold my house to save you because I loved you unconditionally. But love requires respect, honesty, and loyalty. You threw all of those away for a woman who saw you as nothing more than a way to steal from an elderly woman. Mom, please, I'll make this right. I'll pay you back every penny. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for this. With what money, Ethan? The investigators tell me you've already spent over $200,000 on luxury items and gambling. You have no business, no assets, and now no freedom. You can't make anything right because you have nothing left to give. As I hung up the phone and prepared to leave, Ethan pressed his hand against the glass, his mouth moving desperately, trying to tell me something. But I had nothing left to hear. The son I'd raised was gone, replaced by a stranger who had sold his mother's future for a beautiful lie. Walking out of that jail, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Relief. The truth was finally out, the lies were finally over, and for the first time in days, I knew exactly where I stood. I was alone, but I was free. And sometimes, freedom is worth any price. The weeks following Ethan's arrest blurred together in a symphony of legal meetings, court documents, and devastating discoveries. Marcus had warned me that recovering stolen assets would be challenging, but the reality exceeded my worst fears. Jessica and Ethan had been incredibly efficient in their spending spree. District Attorney Rachel Morrison, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in fraud cases, laid out the grim financial picture during our first meeting. Mrs. Thompson, we've traced approximately $278,000 in expenditures over the past 3 months. A 2024 BMW X7 worth $95,000, purchased in Jessica's name. Jewelry from Tiffany & Co. totaling $31,000. A lease deposit and 6 months' rent on a luxury apartment amounting to $27,000. And then there are the casino losses. Casino losses? Your son developed quite a gambling habit during his time in Phoenix. We have records showing he lost approximately $89,000 playing high-stakes poker and blackjack. Jessica was apparently encouraging this behavior, telling him they needed to multiply their investment to pay you back faster. Each revelation was like a punch to the gut. While I'd been sleeping on Mrs. Martinez's couch, Ethan had been living like a millionaire, convincing himself that his reckless spending was somehow going to help me. "What about the BMW? Can't we sell it?" D.A. Morrison's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "It's financed, not purchased outright." Jessica put down $25,000 and took out a loan for the rest. The car's already depreciated below the loan value, so selling it would actually result in additional debt. The apartment lease was equally problematic. Jessica had signed a year-long lease with substantial penalties for early termination. The jewelry had been gifts that would be nearly impossible to recover without lengthy civil litigation that could cost more than the items were worth. So what can we recover? Honestly? Maybe $40,000 to $50,000 in total, and that's if we're lucky. Most of your money has been converted into experiences and depreciating assets. The cash they spent is simply gone. I sat in that sterile government office, listening to the financial death of my entire life savings, and felt something break inside me. Not my spirit, that had already been tested and proven stronger than I'd imagined, but my last remaining illusions about getting my old life back. However, D.A. Morrison had some encouraging news about the criminal charges. The good news is that we have overwhelming evidence for the fraud charges. Wire fraud carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. Elder abuse adds another 5 to 10 years. Jessica's history of similar crimes makes this a career criminal situation, which could result in an enhanced sentence. And Ethan? That depends largely on his cooperation. If he testifies against Jessica and provides information about her methods and other potential victims, he might see his sentence reduced to 3 to 5 years. If he continues to protect her or claims ignorance, he could be looking at 10-15 years. Marcus had been quietly taking notes throughout the meeting. After we left the DA's office, he shared his own perspective. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been thinking about your situation from a different angle. Yes, the criminal justice system will punish them for what they did, but that doesn't solve your immediate problem. You need somewhere to live and some financial security." "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted. "Mrs. Martinez has been wonderful, but I can't live on her couch forever. And my Social Security payments won't cover rent in Dallas." "That's what I want to discuss. Have you considered a civil lawsuit? Even if the criminal case doesn't recover much money, a civil judgment could attach to any future assets they acquire. Plus, there might be other avenues we haven't explored." Marcus had done additional research into Jessica's background. She had previously lived under at least 3 different names and had left a trail of financial destruction across multiple states. But more importantly, she'd been sloppy about hiding some of her earlier gains. We found a safety deposit box in Phoenix, registered under one of her aliases. The contents haven't been inventoried yet, but safety deposit boxes are where people typically hide valuable items they don't want discovered. There was also the possibility that Jessica had insurance policies or hidden accounts that could be claimed in a civil case. Marcus had contacts with forensic accountants who specialized in tracking down concealed assets. It would cost about $15,000 to hire the forensic team, but if they find what I think they might find, it could be worth 10 times that amount. I looked at Marcus, this man who had become my unlikely champion, and made a decision that surprised us both. "I don't have $15,000, Marcus, but I'll work for it. I'll take whatever job I can find, and I'll pay you back every penny with interest, because I'm not just fighting for money anymore. I'm fighting to prove that you can't destroy someone's life without consequences." That afternoon, we filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit against both Ethan and Jessica, seeking not just the return of my money, but also punitive damages for emotional distress, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The lawsuit demanded $1.2 million in total damages. Marcus explained that while we were unlikely to collect the full amount, a large judgment would serve 2 purposes. It would follow them for the rest of their lives, garnishing any wages or assets they acquired, and it would send a message to other potential scammers that targeting elderly victims carried serious long-term consequences. But the most important development came 3 days later. Marcus received a call from Detective Chen with news that changed everything. "Mrs. Thompson, you need to get down to the station immediately. We just arrested someone else, and they're claiming to have information about additional accounts Jessica was hiding. This could be the break we've been waiting for." As we drove to the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Genuine hope. Not hope that my old life would magically return, but hope that justice might actually be possible, that the woman who had orchestrated my son's betrayal might finally face consequences that mattered. The story was far from over. In fact, as I would soon discover, it was about to take a turn that none of us had anticipated. The person waiting for us at the Dallas police station was not what I expected. Robert Chen, a 52-year-old accountant from Denver, sat across from Detective Chen, no relation, with the defeated look of a man who'd lost everything. But as his story unfolded, I realized he might be the key to recovering not just my money, but my dignity. "Mrs. Thompson," Robert began, his voice shaking, "I want to start by saying how sorry I am for what happened to you. If I'd been braver 6 months ago, you might never have become Jessica's victim." Detective Chen explained that Robert had driven straight from Colorado. After seeing news coverage of Jessica's arrest, he'd been carrying guilt and information that could dramatically change our case. "Tell Mrs. Thompson what you told me," Detective Chen urged. Robert took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I was going through a messy divorce. I was lonely, bitter about paying alimony, and angry at my ex-wife. I met Jessica on the same dating app where she found your son. She was calling herself Jennifer Walsh then, but it was definitely the same woman. The story that followed was eerily familiar. Jessica had seduced Robert, gained his trust, learned about his family's finances, and then convinced him to steal $180,000 from his elderly father's retirement account. The manipulation tactics were identical. She never directly suggested theft, but planted seeds of resentment and entitlement until Robert convinced himself that taking his father's money was justified. "But here's what you need to know," Robert continued, leaning forward intensely. "After I gave her the money, Jessica disappeared, but she made a mistake. She thought I was just another weak-willed victim who'd slink away in shame. She didn't count on me hiring a private investigator to track her down." Robert had spent the past year and a half following Jessica's trail, learning about her other victims, documenting her methods. He'd discovered that she operated with sophisticated financial structures designed to hide stolen money. She has accounts in 3 different states under various names, but more importantly, she has a safety deposit box in Las Vegas that she thinks no one knows about. I have the box number, the bank name, and documentation proving she's been depositing stolen money there regularly. Marcus was frantically taking notes. "How do you know about the box?" "Because I followed her there 6 months ago. She meets with a man named Vincent Carrera, who helps her launder money through a series of shell companies. They've been doing this for years, Mrs. Thompson. Your son wasn't her first victim, and he wouldn't have been her last." Detective Chen was already on the phone with FBI contacts. Money laundering across state lines made this a federal case, which meant more resources and more serious consequences for Jessica. "Robert," I asked quietly, "why didn't you go to the police 2 years ago?" His face flushed with shame. "Because I'd have to admit that I stole from my own father. My dad was 84 years old, Mrs. Thompson. The stress of discovering what I'd done gave him a heart attack. He died 3 months later, and I've spent every day since then knowing that I killed him for a woman who saw me as nothing more than a wallet." The room fell silent. Here was a man who'd made the same terrible choices as my son, but who'd spent 2 years trying to make amends rather than running away from responsibility. "After my father died, I couldn't live with the guilt. I hired the private investigator not to get revenge on Jessica, but to try to stop her from destroying other families. I've been building a case against her, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to bring her down." "Why now?" Marcus asked. "Because when I saw the news about Mrs. Thompson's case, I realized Jessica was getting bolder, targeting victims for larger amounts. Your case might be the one that finally puts her away for life. But more than that," he looked directly at me, "I saw the interview where you talked about losing your house, and I couldn't let another parent suffer because I was too much of a coward to come forward." Over the next 3 hours, Robert shared a treasure trove of information: bank account numbers, transaction records, photographs of Jessica with Vincent Carrera, documentation of at least 6 other victims across 4 states. The FBI would need weeks to process everything, but the preliminary assessment was staggering. "Mrs. Thompson," Agent Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division explained, "if Mr. Chen's information is accurate, Jessica Walsh has stolen approximately $2.3 million from elderly victims over the past 5 years. Your case represents the largest single theft, but you're part of a much bigger criminal enterprise. The implications were enormous. As part of a federal racketeering case, I would have priority in asset recovery. The Las Vegas safety deposit box alone reportedly contained over $400,000 in cash and jewelry. There were also real estate investments made with stolen money that could be seized and liquidated. "What does this mean for Ethan?" I asked. Agent Martinez consulted his notes. "If your son cooperates fully and testifies against both Jessica and Vincent Carrera, his sentence could be reduced to time served plus probation. The Justice Department is more interested in the career criminals than the victims they manipulated." That evening, as Marcus drove me back to Mrs. Martinez's house, I felt overwhelmed by the day's revelations. Robert's courage in coming forward had transformed my personal tragedy into a federal criminal case with real potential for justice and recovery. But more than that, meeting Robert had shown me something important about forgiveness and redemption. Unlike my son, who continued to blame others for his choices, Robert had spent 2 years taking responsibility for his actions and working to prevent other families from suffering. "Marcus," I said, as we pulled into Mrs. Martinez's driveway, "I want to do something when this is all over." "What's that?" "I want to work with Robert to create some kind of foundation or support group for families who've been torn apart by these kinds of scams. Not just to recover money, but to help people rebuild trust and relationships after betrayal." Marcus smiled. "Mrs. Thompson, 6 weeks ago you were a victim. Today, you're becoming an advocate. That's quite a transformation." As I walked up to Mrs. Martinez's front door, I realized he was right. I was no longer the same woman who'd trusted blindly and loved without boundaries. I'd become someone stronger, someone who understood that true love sometimes requires tough choices and that justice is worth fighting for, even when it hurts. Tomorrow would bring news that would test that new strength in ways I couldn't imagine. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Agent Martinez's voice was tight with excitement as he delivered news that would change everything. "Mrs. Thompson, we executed search warrants in Las Vegas, Phoenix, and Denver simultaneously yesterday evening. What we found exceeded our most optimistic projections." I sat up in bed, fully awake despite the early hour. Mrs. Martinez appeared in her bathrobe, sensing the importance of the call. The Las Vegas safety deposit box contained $347,000 in cash, plus jewelry and luxury watches worth approximately $180,000. We also found detailed records that Jessica apparently kept of all her victims: names, amounts stolen, methods used. It's like she was keeping trophies. The vindication was overwhelming. Every lie Jessica had told, every manipulation she'd used on my son, every dollar she'd stolen was documented in her own handwriting. "But here's the really big news," Agent Martinez continued. "Vincent Carrera's operation was much larger than we anticipated. We've identified 23 victims across 7 states, with total thefts approaching $4.2 million. The Justice Department is calling it one of the largest elder fraud rings they've prosecuted." Marcus arrived at Mrs. Martinez's house within an hour, carrying copies of the federal indictment that had been unsealed that morning. The charges against Jessica were breathtaking: racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, and tax evasion. If convicted on all counts, she faced up to 85 years in federal prison. "And Ethan?" I asked. "His charges have been separated from the federal case. The district attorney is offering him a plea deal: 3 years probation and full cooperation in testifying against Jessica and Vincent in exchange for pleading guilty to theft and elder abuse at the state level." The offer came with conditions. Ethan would have to make a complete public confession, participate in community service focused on elder fraud prevention, and submit to financial monitoring for the duration of his probation. He would also be required to attend counseling for gambling addiction and manipulation recovery. "He has 48 hours to accept the deal," Marcus explained. "If he refuses, he'll be prosecuted federally alongside Jessica, and he could face 15-20 years in prison." I should have felt relief, but instead I felt empty. Justice was coming. Money would be recovered, but my relationship with my son was still destroyed. The legal system could punish him for his crimes, but it couldn't restore the trust and love that had been shattered. That afternoon, D.A. Morrison called with an update on Ethan's decision. "Mrs. Thompson, your son wants to accept the plea deal, but he's requesting one modification. He wants to meet with you before he enters his plea. He says he has things to tell you that he couldn't say while Jessica was influencing him." I discussed the request with Marcus, who was skeptical. "Mrs. Thompson, you don't owe him anything. You've been through enough emotional trauma." But Robert Chen, who had become an unexpected friend and advisor, offered a different perspective. "Mrs. Thompson, I spent 2 years wishing I could have one honest conversation with my father before he died. Ethan might be a criminal, but he's still your son. Maybe hearing what he has to say will help you find closure, one way or another." The meeting was arranged for the next day at the Dallas County Jail. This time, I went alone, despite Marcus's objections. Some conversations can only happen between a mother and son, without lawyers or investigators, or anyone else who might get in the way of truth. Ethan looked different when they brought him into the visitor's room. Thinner, older, but also clearer somehow. The manic energy and desperate charm were gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Mom, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I'm here because I need to understand Ethan. Not for the lawyers or the FBI, but for me. I need to know if any part of the son I raised is still in there." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with tears. "Mom, I want to tell you something that nobody else knows, not even the lawyers. 3 weeks before I asked you for the money, Jessica gave me an ultimatum. She said if I really loved her, I'd prove it by choosing her over everyone else in my life, including you." "What do you mean?" "She said that as long as I was dependent on your approval and love, I'd never be a real man. She said real men take what they need instead of begging for it. She said if I couldn't find a way to get money without asking you directly, then I wasn't worthy of her love." The manipulation was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. Jessica hadn't just convinced Ethan to steal from me. She'd convinced him that stealing was actually an act of independence and maturity. "But Ethan, you're 39 years old. How could you not see through that?" "Because I wanted to believe her, Mom. After Dad died, after my divorce, after my business started failing, I felt like such a failure. Jessica made me feel powerful and desired and important. When she challenged me to prove my love, I wanted to show her that I could be the kind of man she claimed to want. So you chose her over me. I chose the fantasy of being someone different over the reality of being your son. And Mom, I've had 6 weeks in this jail to think about that choice, and I finally understand what it cost me. What did it cost you? Everything that actually mattered. You loved me when I was broke. You loved me when I was divorced. You loved me when I was failing. Jessica only loved the idea of what I could give her. I traded the person who loved me unconditionally for someone who loved me conditionally, and the condition was that I had to become a criminal. For the first time since this nightmare began, I heard something in Ethan's voice that sounded like the son I'd raised. Not the charming manipulator, not the desperate criminal, but the confused, hurt man who'd made terrible choices and was finally ready to take responsibility for them. "Ethan, if you could go back, what would you do differently?" "I would have introduced you to Jessica the first week I met her. I would have been honest about my debts from the beginning. I would have asked for your advice instead of your money. And when she started suggesting that I take what I needed instead of asking for help, I would have recognized it as the red flag it was and walked away. And now? What happens now? Now I take the plea deal. I testify against Jessica and Vincent. I do my community service. I go to counseling. And I spend however many years it takes proving to you that the man who betrayed you was a stranger, but your son is still here. Ethan, I need you to understand something. I forgive you for the money. Money can be replaced, but I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Trust, once broken, doesn't just heal because someone says they're sorry. I know, Mom, and I'm not asking you to trust me now. I'm asking you to give me the chance to earn back your trust over time, even if it takes the rest of my life." As I left the jail that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, that would take much longer to return, but the peace that comes from finally understanding the whole truth. My son had made unforgivable choices, but he was finally ready to face the consequences. Jessica's reign of terror was coming to an end, and I was discovering that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. The reckoning was complete. Now came the harder work of rebuilding. 6 months later, I stood in a federal courthouse in Dallas, watching as Jessica Walsh was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Vincent Carrera received 30 years. The judge's words still echo in my mind. These defendants preyed on the most vulnerable members of our society, elderly parents who loved their children unconditionally. Their crimes weren't just theft, they were attacks on the very foundation of family trust. The asset recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. In total, $1.7 million was recovered from various accounts, properties, and luxury items. After legal fees and victim compensation from other cases, I received $847,000, more than double what I'd originally lost. But the money, while important, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was what I'd become during the process of fighting for justice. Marcus had been right 6 months earlier when he said I'd transformed from victim to advocate. Working with Robert Chen and other victims of similar scams, we'd established the Betrayal Recovery Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided support for families torn apart by fraud and financial abuse. Our first major initiative was a series of workshops in senior centers across Texas, teaching elderly people how to recognize manipulation tactics and protect themselves from financial predators. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who'd been completely fooled by her own son was now teaching others how to avoid being fooled. "Mrs. Thompson," said Maria Santos, a 72-year-old widow who attended our seminar in Houston, "how do you trust anyone after what happened to you?" It was a question I heard frequently, and my answer had evolved over the months. "Maria, I learned the difference between blind trust and informed trust. Blind trust is believing someone because you love them. Informed trust is believing someone because their actions consistently match their words over time." The foundation had helped 47 families in our first 6 months of operation. Some were dealing with children who'd stolen their savings, others with romance scams, and still others with investment fraud. What they all had in common was the devastating realization that people they'd trusted had deliberately betrayed them. Robert Chen had become our co-director and my closest friend. His experience with guilt and redemption brought a perspective I couldn't provide alone. Together, we'd developed a program that addressed not just the financial aspects of elder fraud, but the emotional recovery process. The hardest part, Robert often told our support groups, isn't losing the money. It's losing your ability to trust your own judgment. When someone you love convinces you to make terrible decisions, you start questioning everything about yourself. As for Ethan, he'd kept his word about the plea deal. He testified completely and honestly against Jessica and Vincent, providing crucial details that helped prosecutors secure their convictions. He was currently serving his 3-year probation while working at a nonprofit organization that built homes for low-income families. We'd had dinner together 3 times in the past 6 months. Awkward, careful conversations where we both tried to navigate the new reality of our relationship. He was attending gambling addiction counseling and had voluntarily submitted to financial monitoring that would continue long after his probation ended. "Mom," he'd said during our most recent dinner, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that losing your trust was the worst consequence of my choices. Worse than jail, worse than losing Jessica, worse than the public humiliation. I'm working on becoming someone worthy of your trust again, even if it takes decades." I appreciated his words, but I was honest with him about my boundaries. "Ethan, I'm proud of the work you're doing now, but trust isn't rebuilt through words or good intentions. It's rebuilt through consistent actions over time. We're not there yet, and we may never be, but I'm willing to see what happens." The foundation work had also led to an unexpected opportunity. The FBI had asked me to join a task force focused on elder fraud prevention. My role would be to review cases and help identify manipulation patterns that law enforcement might miss. "Mrs. Thompson," Agent Martinez had explained, "you have a unique perspective. You understand how these predators think because you've been targeted by the best of them. Your insights could help us protect other families." Standing in my new apartment, a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom place that I'd purchased with part of my recovered funds, I reflected on the journey from that terrible night when I discovered my empty house to this moment of purpose and empowerment. I'd lost my old life, my blind faith in family loyalty, and my naive trust in the goodness of people I loved. But I'd gained something more valuable, a clear understanding of my own strength, a deeper appreciation for genuine relationships, and a sense of purpose that transcended my personal tragedy. Mrs. Martinez had become more than a neighbor. She was now my chosen family. Marcus continued to work with the foundation pro bono, saying that our case had reminded him why he'd become an investigator in the first place. Robert and I had developed a friendship based on shared experience and mutual respect rather than blood relations that could be exploited. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. It was Detective Chen with news about another case. "Mrs. Thompson, we've got a situation in Fort Worth. A 74-year-old man just discovered that his daughter and her boyfriend have stolen $420,000 from his retirement accounts. The manipulation tactics sound very similar to what Jessica used on your son. Could you drive down tomorrow and talk to him?" I looked at my calendar, mentally rearranging my schedule. Of course. Send me the details. As I hung up the phone, I realized that this was my life now. Not the life I'd planned, not the life I'd thought I wanted, but the life I'd chosen after everything else had been stripped away. I was 67 years old, starting over, and for the first time in decades, I was exactly where I needed to be. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had instead revealed who I really was beneath all the roles I'd played: mother, homeowner, caretaker, victim. Underneath all of that, I was simply Linda Thompson, a woman who refused to let criminals win, who could transform pain into purpose, and who understood that sometimes the greatest victory is discovering you're stronger than you ever knew. Tomorrow, I would drive to Fort Worth and help another family begin their journey from betrayal to recovery, and that felt like the most important work I'd ever done. 1 year later, I received a phone call that would bring my story full circle in the most unexpected way. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Detective Williams from the Phoenix Police Department. I'm calling about Jessica Walsh." My heart sank. Had she somehow been released? Had there been an appeal I didn't know about? "Detective, is she getting out of prison?" "No, ma'am. She's still serving her 45-year sentence, but we've received information that there might be additional victims from before she started her current operation. We need your help with something rather unusual." The story Detective Williams told me was both shocking and strangely satisfying. Jessica had apparently kept detailed journals during her years as a con artist, not just records of her crimes, but actual diary entries where she documented her methods, her thoughts about her victims, and her long-term strategies. "Mrs. Thompson, these journals go back 7 years. We're talking about potentially dozens of additional victims who never reported the crimes because they were too ashamed or didn't realize they'd been professionally conned. The FBI wanted me to review the journals and help identify patterns that could lead to other victims receiving justice and recovery. It would mean spending weeks reading the thoughts of the woman who'd orchestrated my son's betrayal, but it could also mean helping dozens of other families get closure. "I'll do it," I said, without hesitation. The journals arrived at my apartment in 12 banker's boxes. As I opened the first one and began reading Jessica's neat handwriting, I was struck by the clinical coldness of her approach to destroying families. Entry dated 3 years ago. Target identified: Robert Chen, Denver. Divorce proceedings, bitter about alimony payments, close relationship with wealthy father. Estimated potential: $150,000, $200,000. Strategy: position as fellow victim of unfair divorce settlement, build romantic attachment, introduce financial stress scenarios. Reading about Robert's case from Jessica's perspective was chilling. She'd planned every conversation, every moment of false intimacy, every manipulation with the precision of a military operation. But it was the entry about my family that nearly broke me. Target: Ethan Thompson, Dallas. Mother owns substantial property. Son has gambling tendencies and business failures. Strong mother-son codependency could be exploited. Estimated potential: $300,000, $500,000. Challenge: mother appears intelligent and cautious. Strategy: isolate son emotionally, create artificial urgency, position theft as borrowing rather than fraud. Key insight: son desperately wants to feel like successful provider rather than dependent child. She'd seen through our family dynamics with terrifying accuracy. Every weakness, every insecurity, every button to push was carefully cataloged in her journal like a predator studying prey. Over the following weeks, working with FBI analysts, We identified 31 additional victims across 8 states. The total amount stolen over Jessica's 7-year career was approaching $6.8 million. But more shocking was the personal cost documented in her journals. Today, Robert Chen's father had a heart attack after discovering the theft. Collateral damage, but unavoidable. The emotional pain makes victims less likely to pursue legal action. Ethan Thompson's mother discovered empty house. According to E, she was devastated. Good. Emotional trauma will make her more cooperative when E presents the robbery story. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. Jessica hadn't just stolen money. She deliberately caused maximum emotional damage because she knew trauma would make her victims less likely to fight back. But reading those journals also revealed something else. Jessica's growing concern about my case specifically. Thompson investigation expanding too quickly. Private investigator Marcus Reed is more competent than expected. Mrs. Thompson not behaving like typical victim. Too organized, too persistent. May need to accelerate exit strategy. E reporting mother asking too many questions about the robbery. Story falling apart faster than anticipated. Mrs. Thompson appears to be getting outside help. This could become problematic. Knowing that I'd scared Jessica Walsh, that my refusal to simply accept her lies had forced her to worry, gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected. The journal review led to a remarkable development. The FBI was able to recover an additional $2.3 million in assets that Jessica had hidden in offshore accounts. More importantly, 23 families who'd never reported their victimization were contacted and provided with evidence they could use in civil cases. One of those families was the Richardsons from Oklahoma. Their 19-year-old daughter had convinced them to mortgage their farm to fund her business opportunity with Jessica. When the scam collapsed, they'd lost everything, but were too ashamed to report it. "Mrs. Thompson," said elderly farmer Bill Richardson during our phone conversation, "we thought we were the only ones stupid enough to fall for something like this. Knowing there were others, knowing it wasn't our fault, that's given us back our dignity." The Betrayal Recovery Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible. We now had chapters in 6 states, had helped over 200 families, and had worked with law enforcement to prevent an estimated $4.2 million in additional fraud through our education programs. Robert Chen had become my business partner in every sense. Our shared experience had created a bond stronger than many marriages. We'd even started a small romantic relationship built on mutual respect and complete honesty about our pasts and our boundaries. "Linda," he said one evening, as we worked late reviewing grant applications for the foundation, "do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we'd never met Jessica?" "I used to," I admitted, "but not anymore. If Jessica had never entered our lives, I'd still be that naive woman who trusted blindly and enabled thoughtlessly. You'd still be carrying the guilt of your father's death alone. We'd both be smaller versions of ourselves. So you're saying we should thank her?" "I'm saying we should thank ourselves for choosing to become something better than what she tried to make us." As I write this final chapter of my story, Ethan and I have just finished dinner together. Our 4th dinner this year, but the first one that felt genuinely comfortable. He's been promoted to project manager at the nonprofit where he works, and he's gotten engaged to a social worker named Amanda who knows his complete history and loves him anyway. "Mom," he said as we sat on my apartment balcony, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Go ahead." "Do you think you'll ever be able to fully forgive me? Not the surface forgiveness you've already given, but the deep forgiveness that would let us have a real relationship again?" I thought carefully before answering. "Ethan, I think forgiveness isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a choice you make every day. Some days, I choose to forgive you more easily than others. But the real question isn't whether I forgive you. It's whether you can forgive yourself enough to become the man you're capable of being. And what kind of man is that? The kind who doesn't need his mother's approval to feel worthy. The kind who chooses integrity over convenience. The kind who protects the people he loves instead of exploiting them. You're not that man yet, but you're working toward becoming him. And if I become that man, then we'll have a relationship based on who we actually are, not who we used to be or who we wish we were. As Ethan left that evening, he hugged me goodbye, a real hug, not the desperate, manipulative embraces of the past. "I love you, Mom. Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that I could change. I love you too, son. Thank you for actually changing. The next morning, I received a letter from the FBI. Jessica Walsh had died in prison of a heart attack at age 38. Her criminal career was over, her victims were finally safe, and her legacy would be the families she'd unintentionally made stronger through their fight for justice. Standing at my kitchen window, watching the Dallas sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the journey from that terrible night when I discovered my empty house to this moment of peace and purpose. I'd lost my old life, but I'd gained something more valuable, a clear understanding of my own worth, independence from the need for others' approval, and the knowledge that I could survive anything because I'd already survived the worst thing I could imagine. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me had instead revealed my true strength. The son who broke my trust was slowly earning it back through consistent action rather than empty promises. The money that was stolen had been recovered with interest, and the pain that almost consumed me had been transformed into purpose that now helped hundreds of other families heal. If you're watching this story and you're dealing with betrayal from someone you love, I want you to know this: you are stronger than you realize. Justice is possible, even when it seems hopeless, and sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing you ever do with your life. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If my story has touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of survival and triumph. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing that stories of hope are reaching people around the world at all hours of the day and night. Remember, you are not defined by what happens to you. You are defined by what you choose to do about what happens to you. And sometimes, choosing to fight back is the greatest gift you can give yourself.